Tuesday.
We welcome to the program Pepper Crutcher, attorney with Balch Bingham. Pepper, good to see you.
Good to see you, and good afternoon, Mississippi.
Yeah, there you go. So a little background. I've known Pepper for 40-something years, I think, at this point. When you were, as you describe, a baby lawyer, you were quite helpful in our new business venture, helping us set up all of our employment policies and procedures and practices and making sure we did everything in accordance with the law and taking care of everybody. And that's an invaluable service, by the way. Anybody out there thinking about starting a business or operating a business, it's essential these days to navigate the maze. And that's what you do on behalf of employers, is navigate this complex maze of laws and regulations and everything else is crazy that they dump on us.
I've started calling myself a lawware engineer.
I like that. That's a very appropriate way to describe it. So, all right, so you read the article that I wrote. I'm just give a little background I think will be interesting to the audience here. You read the article that I wrote about just some off-the-wall thinking about how to address the healthcare issue in the state with a focus on how do we get coverage to the uninsured that are currently burdening the healthcare system with receiving care and not paying for it. So that was my goal. And in the article, I talk about how I even got interested in this subject, and it goes back to a conversation that I know you will recall that we had. I called you on the telephone. I'd seen an ad from a candidate for president at the time, Barack Obama, talking about the shared responsibility, something that's a nightmare to you, right? You have to deal with this with the employers.
It's turned out to be less of a nightmare than the requirement to file annual reports of your coverage officers. That's okay. Ended up being the thing that got more people fined more than anything else.
Okay. Well, the shared responsibility, as you know, the plan Mr. Obama had was way more egregious than what we ended up with.
Yes.
He had, and that's what I talk about in the article. But I reference my attorney, calling my attorney. That's you, as you know. I called you, and you said, wait. And I was a little passionate about, like, man, I'm trying to make decisions today. This thing's going to cost me a fortune. You said, just wait a second. First, this thing has to pass. I know, but I think it's going to pass. Then the Supreme Court, it's going to get challenged, and the Supreme Court's got to uphold it. Well, I think the Supreme Court's going to uphold it, and then it's got to be codified. So I'm sitting there saying, well, how the heck do I make business decisions on the basis of that? We just don't know. But what you were telling me was true, was accurate. We really didn't. And then finally we get a law and we get some code, and we're still making code. I just talked about that.
Yes, this has become a pattern in modern American legislation. What happens is you got a lot of bad news that you can't get through Congress or a state legislature.
Yeah.
And so you assign the news writing to an agency that'll write the news months or years later, so you don't have to talk about it when you're trying to pass the bill.
About right. Well, Nancy Pelosi famously told us. But as you know, I know you were digging into the legislation, and I got curious, and this is what launched and sparked my interest in politics. And I got curious and started reading it, focusing on the employer provisions, the employer shared responsibility. And it gets into some legalese, of course, but the most difficult thing, as you know, Pepper, about reading 2,700-page bills is there's like a gazillion references to other code. And unless you got the IRS code at your disposal, you really sometimes couldn't tell what they were talking about in reading the legislation.
That's correct. And more than that, a lot of it, the Affordable Care Act, which, by the way, is 936 pages if you print it on both sides in 10-point font. And that's just the statute, not the rules. The rules are thousands and thousands of extra pages.
Yeah.
A lot of it was cut and pasted from other existing statutes. So in order to know what this language means, you have to go find out where it was cut and pasted from and how that language has been interpreted. Yeah.
So it's hard. So you have to have someone with your skills and knowledge to navigate that. But at the point, we didn't have enough information. That's what frustrated me. And I just saw this guy's going to get elected. He's going to focus on this. I fear it's going to pass. It's going to be permanent. And I need to know how that affects me as a business owner, financially and otherwise. But this is what businesses have to deal with respect to government on a daily basis.
Yes,
it's this unknown.
What has happened is our government, especially our federal government, has commandeered private employers to do the social engineering projects that the government doesn't want to do and pay for directly.
Yeah.
And every time a new project comes down the pipe, they say, "Oh, let's put one more on employers and let them do the work for us."
And that's kind of where we are. So one of the proposals that I outlined in the article is something I actually shared with you 10, 12 years ago. And it was, you recall, when I had two foster kids, and it was my frustration of not being able to put them on my private coverage. I was willing to pay for it, but in accordance with, in general, with federal law, without a whole bunch of paperwork and to get some sort of exception and waiver, they're going to be covered under Medicaid. And I wanted them on my private coverage, and I even went to DHS, who was a client of mine, and sorry, Gerard, we can't help you with that sort of deal. And I went to you, I said, well, I just had this idea. What if I just wanted to add people to my group coverage, my employer group coverage? I'll pay for it. I just want to add them. It sounds to me like I couldn't do that. And then you told me the other day, well, you have this thing called ERISA, and that hurt my head when you said that. And then I remembered what the ERISA law was and thinking, I just want to help, man. Can't the government get out of the way? And that's where we are.
Yes. What that would require was a fundamental rethinking and rewrite of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Which is based on employer-sponsored benefit programs for employees and their household dependents.
Why they got to make it so hard? It was just a noble offer to help. That's all it really was. And the government says, oh, no. And I sometimes feel like, as I said on the show earlier, that they would see that as me encroaching on their gig. You can't possibly help people. We're the only people that should do that, so we can get all the credit.
Look, you might have, assuming your insurer was willing to do it, which they wouldn't have been.
Of course.
You might have gotten away with doing it unless you were audited, and then you might determine to have disqualified your plan for tax purposes, which means all the benefits of your contributions would have been taxable to your employees.
As opposed to being pre-tax.
Yes.
Which is a nightmare, and but that's a disparity, is it not? We have disparity in that group coverage, premiums paid by the employer and the employer pre-tax. In the individual market, they're not.
You know, one of the ways that President Obama tried to sell his original version of Obamacare to Republicans in Congress was by saying, look, you should be for the idea of getting employee health care decoupled from employment. So
right.
You're not having to pay for their health care. They're getting their health care through some other options. And so you can just focus on what they'd rather have anyway, which is dollars on their paycheck.
Yeah, which goes back, as you know, to World War II.
Yes.
The idea of so-called fringe benefits was conceived of in World War II when we had price and wage controls, and employers, in an effort to compete in the market for employees, said, well, we can't pay them anymore. We'll just give them something over here, and that's where the idea came from,
yes.
Of health, right?
Yes, and Congress went along with it and created tax preferences for all kinds of employee benefits, and we now find that we've created a prisoner of our we're prisoners of our own device.
Yeah. That's exactly right. But I don't think in the 40s they saw it evolving into, I mean, you get a paycheck now, there's 18 different blocks filled in, many of which are your various benefits and programs you participate in. Some is coming out of your pay, some your employer's contributing to, 401k plans, disability insurance, high deductible plans, savings accounts, and all that kind of crazy stuff. Back then, it was just, how about some health insurance for $10 a month?
So the anxiety you remember having when you were an employer, my clients are having now about the cost and availability of insurance and what would Medicaid expansion do to that. The workforce participation problem they're all having, would Medicaid expansion make that better or worse or matter at all? Who might go part-time? Or quit if they had Medicaid expansion available instead of employer provided. Those are all unknowns, and they're all very material to especially small employers. The smaller you are, the more this stuff matters to you.
Absolutely.
And so I'm glad I'm not a small employer.
Well, and the question, though, Pepper, is, as you well know, just for the benefit of our audience, a small employer is considered one with fewer than 50 employees.
For Affordable Care Act purposes, yes.
That's right. So, and they're not compelled by the Affordable Care Act law to offer so-called minimum essential affordable coverage to their employees. The large employers are, small aren't.
If they offer it, the details of those coverage are controlled by the Affordable Care Act, but their offering of it or not is not compelled.
We'll continue it on the other side of the break. We got Pepper Crutcher, attorney with Balch Bingham. We'll dig into this in even greater detail. Stay with us. So we're back in the Element Well studio. All right, so this ERISA law dictates a lot of what we can and cannot do as employers vis-a-vis benefits, health care coverage, et cetera, and retirement plans too, I believe, right?
Yeah. You get most Americans get most of their benefits through their employment, and because of the tax preference, and it's heavily regulated by ERISA.
Right. All right. So with respect to the big hot topic down there at the Capitol, they're talking about Medicaid expansion. It's nothing new. They've talked about it in years past. It's been available since 2014. The law passed in 2010. The provision which included funding for and the program for the expansion group, which generally is referred to as able-bodied adults. Traditional Medicaid does not cover those. It's really just what the left calls the working poor. That's the way they don't say able-bodied adults. I believe able-bodied adults is actually in somewhere the bill, if I'm not mistaken, but they call it the working poor. And that's okay, whatever. But the bottom line is that there are those who work who have a very low income from working that don't qualify for Medicaid in the state of Mississippi today. They do qualify for subsidized coverage in the exchanges, the ACA exchanges. And I got to tell you, I've always been confused on the overlap because now, as you know, if one applies, they direct them to Medicaid by law.
Right.
And that, I believe, is mostly, even though I've never seen this stated anywhere, is because it's cheaper for the federal government to cover their health care through Medicaid than it is to subsidize their premiums in the exchanges.
Yes.
I think that's the reason.
I think so, too.
So the point I'm making is you got the range of incomes which are eligible for subsidized coverage, and based on the American Rescue Plan, and now more permanently in the Inflation Reduction Act, 100 to 150% zero-cost premiums. Actually more generous than Medicaid from a premium perspective can be.
And probably better for the provider, too, because nothing pays worse than Medicaid.
Right. They get reimbursed by commercial. The problem, however, and I don't know how much you can say about this, the problem is the carriers that sell in the exchanges nationwide, but in particular in Mississippi, they don't have the best and the most robust provider network. And the last thing a person wants when they're paying for insurance is to go to a doctor only to find out, we don't take your coverage. You got to pay before you leave. You can file it later and wait 2 months and haggle to get reimbursed by your carrier. But what people want to do is put that card down, and at the end of the encounter, they say, we'll file it. Here's your $20 copay. That's what the experienced people want. Would you agree? That's what most people want.
Yes.
So there's a problem.
Especially if you're getting it as an employment benefit, yes.
Yes, exactly. Good point. So we have Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's no secret. They have the most robust provider network in the state. And in almost all 50 states, there's usually one or two that pretty much just dominate with respect to their provider networks. They've been there the longest. They've got the relationships. They've got lots of assets and resources in the state. They sponsor the ball teams. You know exactly where I'm going with this. I mean, they're the community corporate citizens.
And they know their data better than everybody else, and that's why they're number one.
Because they live in the state. They function in the state. They have the benefit of all that. They do not sell, does Blue Cross, in the Mississippi exchange. I honestly think if somehow they would, we could fix this uninsured problem and increase improve the financial situation in the hospital community in the state tomorrow if Blue Cross would start selling individual policies in the exchanges.
I can't express opinion on that, but you should have Brian Lag on your show.
Okay, I know you could, but I can. So, and I believe that they don't really want to sell individual coverage in the exchanges. They don't want those customers. That's just my opinion. Otherwise, why would they? Who would say, well, I have this vehicle to go sell more of what I offer? No, I don't want to do that. They may actually buy it. I mean, that's what it looks like to me, to the average person. And I know you can't say anything about that.
I will say this. I generally think it's a bad idea for government to coerce any market participants to sell or buy anything they don't want to sell or buy.
Well, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that I think government should do that with Blue Cross here either. I don't want Blue Cross to say, Gerard says government on. No, I'm not saying that. I totally agree. It should be voluntary. I'm just expressing that we have a carrier in the state that has a very strong, robust provider network. And I dare say they've got the leading market share, certainly in the group market in the state of Mississippi. I think that's fair to say. Okay.
Yes.
I haven't seen the data. I probably could find it. But it just seems to me like that the providers would get reimbursed at the higher commercial rate. The patients, the subscribers would get access to coverage. It has the most robust network. They would get subsidies from the federal government. Wouldn't cost the state of Mississippi anything. Problem solved.
Well, I suspect insurers generally would say, hey, show us a greatly increased pool of people who are buying insurance, and we may change our view about whether we want to be selling into that market.
Okay.
So it's chicken and an egg situation.
And I would agree. They need a little demographic data. What's the age of those people? Because the older you are, the more likely you are to need their coverage, and you're going to file more claims. So, are we talking about adding more young, healthy people or old, sick people?
Right.
Right? That's what their actuaries are figuring that out on a daily basis.
When I was learning the Affordable Care Act, I went to a conference in Las Vegas where one of the leading experts in America said, healthcare really hasn't been a calling or a profession for a long time. It's not even a business anymore. It's a data. It's data science.
Exactly right. Yeah. I mean, it's a bunch of wonky data people that are sitting back in their offices with about 14 screens in front of them figuring all this out. This is who you need to be signing up, what you need to charge them, and what you need to be paying the providers.
At a granular, real-time level that you and I, you might grasp it, but no lawyer grasps it.
I mean, it's a math exercise.
Yeah.
Totally now. And it's a math exercise where it has to be in conformance with law on top of that.
Yes. I actually helped a client write Affordable Care Act compliance software where I had to translate federal regulations into Boolean logic statements. One of the most difficult things I've ever done.
Which software developers do as a matter of every day, but they rely on people like you to tell them what goes where with respect to those Boolean operators in the expression, right? Yeah. What are the terms that go on which side of the Boolean?
It barely makes sense in English.
Exactly. All right, so there is a legitimate concern. And if we run out of time, we can continue into the next segment. There is a legitimate concern on opponents of expansion that we'd have all these people that are currently getting coverage from their employer. They would go to Medicaid, and that could have a ripple effect, a negative ripple effect. There's no doubt. And the big one I think they would focus on is if that means more people are signing up for Medicaid under expansion, that means the state's share increases based on what's being estimated. It's only 10%, but if it's 10% of a much bigger number, that could cause a financial problem.
And we've already got the worst workforce participation rate in the nation. Barely half of our able-bodied adults are in the workforce, that is, either working or looking for work. How many of them would drop to part-time or drop out if now Medicaid is newly available to them? That's a worry. Nobody seems to have good data about that.
Well, something I just feel like I've always felt like we need to do that doesn't seem to be taken very seriously down there at the Capitol is, has anybody ever talked to any of these people and say, hey, what would you do here and why would you do that? What about the half of the population that can work that isn't? Has anybody gone to them saying, how come you ain't working?
Well, the Hilltop report you referenced already. It at least it looks at actual experience of other states that expanded Medicaid, but there are so many different kinds of Medicaid expansion that it's questionable whether any of those are actually predictive of what ours would look
like. And something else that's a bit unique in Mississippi is that we have an outsized number of hospital institutions that are owned by government. They're municipal or county facilities. We have way more, I think, than as a percentage of total hospitals than any other state. And so that's got to be figured into the math and the model as well. That I don't know that anybody has. The Hilltop references it a little bit in their analysis where they show kind of the pluses and the minuses from a dollar's perspective.
Yes. So any benefits to the publicly owned hospitals could offset otherwise losses that would be caused by increased enrollment.
That's right.
Yeah.
From the uncompensated care is what they're saying.
Right.
So, I mean, because the taxpayers essentially footing the bill for the uncompensated care, not the private hospitals, because these are public hospitals. Right?
At least one large one owned directly by the state and some by counties.
That's true.
Right.
That's a good point. We can continue on the other side. I want to get into a discussion about some of this non-compete legislation and gig worker legislation. It's coming out of Washington. Right back.
Another one of my favorites.
But we're talking to Pepper Crutcher, attorney at Balch Bingham, legal scholar on all things related to employment law. His clients. So you only represent employers, right? Isn't that the way it works, Pepper?
Yes, you really can't work both sides of the street.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
And that's why, of course, you represented us. A valuable representation. So when you get into some of these other nuances before we go on to these non-compete rules that are being challenged, and the Democrats want to completely eliminate non-compete employment or compete agreements or provisions of employment agreements, which would include non-competition.
And a few Republicans, too.
Okay, you're right. They do. I've seen that as well. You're absolutely right. Thank you for correcting me. So, but from an employer perspective, I just feel like with respect to Medicaid expansion, we need more data. How many people here really do fit into this category where they're at risk for leaving their employer coverage or group coverage, going into sign up for expansion if the state were to pass it? How many people are in the ACA coverage? By the way, I did research that. There's 183,000 in the Mississippi signed up in the exchanges. 24,000 of them are in the 100 to 150% federal poverty level range. Because it's it's income based, and the subsidies are based on the range of income that you fit in.
That's premium-free insurance.
Right now it is because of the American Rescue Plan, and then extended in the Inflation Reduction Act under Joe Biden. So 24,000, state of Mississippi. So if every one of them said, "I'm going to Medicaid," because now they could get coverage of Medicaid without the out-of-pocket costs that they're having to bear in the exchanges, with insurance in the exchanges, which I think is limited to $34.50 with the cost sharing.
I wish there were some way to know whether that's actually influencing anyone's decisions about to enroll or not.
I agree, and that's why I've said, can't we just go talk to some people? We got 24,000. Surely we can figure out who they are, and they're not compelled by government to speak, to talk. But I think that some probably would share their thoughts on, I'm in the exchanges. Here's what I don't like and do like about it. If you guys were to expand Medicaid and this is what it would look like, here's the decision I would make. Shouldn't we have that to guide this?
Another data point I'd love to see is how many of those people we think are in the expansion population aren't in the economy because they're not in the on-the-record economy, or they're in the off-the-record economy, in which case would they really want to tell you anything about their income in order to enroll in Medicaid?
Well, I don't honestly think we have all the tools, the assets, the resources, the systems to even properly determine that. Honestly, you told me, and I've kind of played with it myself, just as a possible buyer of coverage in the exchanges. You just input your data, and then they settle up with you when you file your tax return. Is the way it works.
Right.
Assuming you're going to file a tax return and you don't just stay on the coverage. But you know how crazy that is. We don't have enough people to go police this and to go chase everybody down.
Right.
Medicaid certainly doesn't.
Right.
They can't do it now, honestly. Yes. And I would say if the legislature's thinking about enacting Medicaid expansion, you need to make sure that you provide them with the resources, talking about the Division of Medicaid, Mississippi Division of Medicaid, that they need to accurately and efficiently administer the program, because they're struggling now, honestly, with 750, 800,000, still trying to do the redeterminations after the CARES Act, signed into law by President Trump, said you can't kick anybody off once they're on Medicaid. The continuous enrollment provision, right? And now they're having to unwind it. And the last data I looked at said that the Division of Medicaid in Mississippi still has 65% of their total enrolled to review to see if they're still eligible. 65%. Now, I'm not blasting Medicaid. It's a massive undertaking, as you know. And they don't have enough people or the systems to do it.
Folks, if you want to see how complex it is, just to figure out what your modified adjusted household income is, go on the Medicaid website for Mississippi and just download the application.
That's right.
I think 9 pages of it.
That's exactly right.
and see what has to be checked.
So same thing would apply here, except it's probably even more difficult here because most of these people are working that would seek coverage in the expansion coverage group. So, all right, let's talk about non-compete agreements. You know, these are very common in many industries, very common in my industry, in the IT industry. However, ours that you helped us with was a little different. It wasn't a strict, you simply cannot go work for anybody that looks like this company, essentially, or operates in the industry within some geographic, I guess, radius, so to speak. But it didn't strictly forbid that. It did strictly forbid you from sharing secrets and confidential information. It wasn't just you absolutely cannot go to work there, which was your recommendation, and we used that effectively.
Yeah, most Mississippi employers who use non-competes don't appreciate how the law has changed against non-compete use outside of Mississippi, because Mississippi is one of still the most staunch enforcement states. But everywhere else, and increasingly in Mississippi even, your protectable interest that allows you to enforce these agreements is stopping your intellectual property from being stolen from you and given to a competitor or used by your former employee in competition with you.
Customer list.
And the worst problem is things that people have in their heads, that they don't have to take your list. They don't have to upload your docs to a cloud.
Just knowledge.
So just knowledge that they developed that belongs to you, or somebody else developed that belongs to you, and they can take down the street and sell to your competitor. That's a serious problem, and the FTC's rule really doesn't adequately or fairly address that problem.
So what's the deal with government, mainly Democrats, proposing this, but as you indicated, there's some Republicans that are on board with it as well. They just want to eliminate non-compete agreements altogether. They feel like they restrict people from working where they want.
The Linda Kahn, who's chairman of the FTC, has said, and a lot of people in Congress believe, that non-compete agreements depress wages by decreasing competition for talented people. So if Gerard can go work for somebody else at any time, somebody else is more likely to make him a job offer than if they know that Gerard is tied to a non-compete. Why even recruit Gerard?
Sure. And you know this, whenever we would entertain employing someone, making an offer, first question, do you have a non-compete agreement? Will you send it to me? And I'd call you, and you'd say, send it to me. And then you'd come back with an opinion on it.
Yeah, and one of the things I see over and over again is, 20 years ago, some lawyer drafted this agreement, and then the employer has been just using it and updating without ever calling their lawyer, and often the agreements that are actually being used are worse than laughable.
Oh my gosh!
and so I'm on the new employer side of this, and I'm reading this on the phone with him, and I'm laughing like, oh jeepers, look, it looks like this was once a product of a lawyer, but it hasn't been for a long time.
Well, you and I, of course, went to court, as you recall, over one of these. It was an employee that we hired, and we were sued, and was the employee by their former employer. Went to court. The court awarded damages, but it was peanuts at the end of the day, as you recall. And that thing went on for a while. I think, did we go to Supreme Court?
Well, you got out of it. The other party that was in
That's right. My company
went on for 4 more years.
That's right. That's what I remember. And it was a jury trial. You informed me. You educated me. Hey, if it's $1 of economic damages, I remember you telling me that in Mississippi, you get a jury. Is that right?
Yes. You basically anything in circuit court, you get a jury for.
Okay. So this jury was there trying to, but I remember going in front of Judge Chapman at the time. Remember?
Yeah.
And him. So the first thing he said to me and the lawyer representing the plaintiff here, and you were in the room too, can't you business guys just work this out? You remember that?
Yes.
Why are you in court?
And that is a typical judicial reaction to most employment cases, and especially in non-compete cases, where typically there's not a lot of money at stake in non-compete cases. It's the principle and the ability to make your still employees believe that they're enforceable, that's why you're litigating.
Right.
And a judge has, okay, I've got 17 criminal trials I got to get rid of this month. I've got a $2 billion contract breach case, and you want me to spend how long on this?
That's exactly right. But as you recall, the plaintiff actually said that. They said, yeah, we're doing this to send a message to our staff. Don't think about violating that non-compete agreement.
Yes, and that's what the FTC is trying to do with their rule, is send the contrary message out through all America.
I guess my feeling is this is a voluntary agreement between the parties. We don't need the government to say, no, you can't make those voluntary agreements.
I think common laws of the states and the courts of the states are doing just a fine job of this, and FTC is getting in way over its head and about to mess things up badly. Appreciate you coming in, Pepper. Always a good time talking to you, man. Thanks. Coming right back in the Element Wealth studio, final segment.